My son called me on a Tuesday morning to remind me that Thanksgiving dinner was at 4 o'clock. He said it casually, the way you'd remind someone to pick up milk. Just so you know, Dad, 4 o'clock. Don't be late. I told him I wouldn't be. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen in Barrie, looking out at the backyard, watching the maple tree drop its last red leaves onto the frost-hardened ground. I thought about how I taught him to rake leaves in that same kind of yard, 20-some years ago, how he used to jump into the piles before I could bag them up, how he'd laugh so hard he'd fall over. That was a different version of my son. My name doesn't matter much for this story. What matters is that I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the city of Barrie. I took early retirement 2 years ago, and for the past 18 months, I had been quietly writing checks that kept my son's life from falling apart. His name's Russell. He's 36. He married a woman named Tessa 4 years ago. A wedding I paid for, $52,000, at a vineyard outside Niagara-on-the-Lake, because Tessa had a very specific vision and Russell had very little ability to say no to her. At the time, I told myself it was an investment in their happiness. That's what fathers do. We tell ourselves things like that. After the wedding, they bought a house in Innisfil. A nice house, 4 bedrooms, a double garage, a finished basement. More house than 2 people need. But Tessa had grown up in a big house and she wasn't going to live in anything smaller. The mortgage was $2,340 a month. Russell was working in sales, making decent money but not house in his fill money. So I helped. Not all of it, just $1,200 a month, transferred on the first of every month, like clockwork, directly to their joint account. I also paid for Russell's truck, not as a gift, as a loan, I said. We shook hands on it. $41,000. He was going to pay me back in installments. He never paid back a single one. I want to be clear about something. I didn't help my son because I expected gratitude. I helped him because he's my son, and that's what you do. My own father helped me when I was getting started. I know what it means to have someone in your corner. I wasn't keeping score, but I was paying attention. You can't help but pay attention when you're a father. You notice things. I noticed that the vacation started. 2 weeks in Costa Rica the first year, a long weekend in New York the following spring. Last summer, 10 days in Portugal. I saw the photos on social media. Tessa in a wide-brimmed hat by the ocean. Russell with a glass of wine at some rooftop restaurant in Lisbon. I noticed that the renovation started. They redid the kitchen. Then the master bathroom. Then they put in a hot tub in the backyard. I found out about the hot tub from my grandson, Oliver, Russell's son, from a brief relationship before Tessa. Oliver is 9 years old and spends every other weekend with me, and he mentioned the hot tub the way kids mention things, offhandedly, assuming you already know. I didn't already know. I also noticed that I stopped being invited to things. It happened slowly, the way cold creeps into a house when someone leaves a window cracked. First, it was just a dinner here and there that I heard about after the fact. Then it was a birthday party for Oliver, his 8th birthday, that was held at an indoor trampoline park, and I didn't find out about it until Oliver mentioned it to me 2 weeks later, excited about the cake. I asked Russell about it. He said Tessa had handled the invitations, and there must have been a miscommunication. I let it go. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, Russell called to remind me about dinner. I assumed I was invited. Why wouldn't I be? I'm his father. It's Thanksgiving. I drove up to Innisfil on Thanksgiving afternoon. I brought a bottle of Niagara Peninsula Riesling that I'd been saving, a pie from a bakery in Barrie butter tart, because Russell had loved butter tart since he was a kid, and a card for Oliver with a $20 bill tucked inside, the way my father used to do for me. I pulled into the driveway at 3:45. There were 3 other cars already there. I recognized Tessa's parents' Lexus. I didn't recognize the other 2. I knocked on the door. Tessa opened it. She was dressed up, blowout heels, a silk blouse, and when she saw me standing on the step, something happened to her face. Not surprise exactly. Something more prepared than surprise. Like she'd been expecting this moment and had already decided what expression to wear. "Oh," she said, "I thought Russell told you." I said, "Told me what?" She opened the door a little wider but didn't step back to let me in. Behind her I could see the dining room table, set beautifully, candles, the good dishes, and I could count the place settings from where I stood. 8 chairs. 8 settings. I had not been counted. We're keeping it small this year, she said. Just close family. I stood there for a moment with the wine and the pie and the card for my grandson. I'm his father, I said. I know, she said. It's a lot of people already, and Oliver is here, and we're trying to keep it. Is Russell here? There was a pause. Then Russell appeared behind her in the hallway. He was holding a glass of red wine. He looked at me on the step, and I watched him look, and I understood in that moment that he had known I would show up. He had called me Tuesday to remind me about dinner, but he had never actually invited me. He had called to set up exactly this moment so that Tessa could be the one to turn me away at the door, and he could stand in the hallway and look helpless. Dad, he said, it's just this year we're keeping it. You called me on Tuesday, I said. You told me 4 o'clock. I know. I thought maybe I don't know. I thought Tessa was going to call you. I looked at my son standing in his hallway with his glass of wine in the house I was helping to pay for, and I didn't say anything for a long moment. I looked past him and I saw Oliver at the far end of the hall, small in a little button-up shirt, watching me. When he saw me looking at him, he raised his hand and waved. A small, uncertain wave. I waved back. I told him I'd see him next weekend. Then I turned around and walked back to my car. I drove back to Barry. I put the wine in the fridge. I put the pie on the counter, and I ate a slice of it standing up in the kitchen. Because why not? I fed my dog, a yellow lab named Chester who doesn't care about Thanksgiving or family dynamics and just wanted his dinner. I sat in my chair by the window, and I watched the dark come down over the backyard, and I thought for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt that night. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even primarily hurt. It was something quieter and colder than both of those. It was the feeling of a man who has been giving and giving and giving and has suddenly understood with complete clarity that the giving has been mistaken for a permanent condition. Not a gift, not even a loan. A resource. Like a tap you leave running because it's always been running. I thought about the $1,200 a month. 18 months of payments, not counting the truck, not counting the wedding. I thought about the birthday party I wasn't told about, the Portugal photos, the hot tub. I thought about the look on Tessa's face when she opened the door. Prepared. Ready. I thought about my son standing in the hallway, holding his wine. I didn't make any decisions that night. I just let myself understand what I was understanding. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, a woman I've worked with for 12 years, and I asked her to walk me through the structure of the accounts I held with Russell. There were two, the joint account where I made my monthly transfers, and a small investment account I'd set up for Oliver's education, a registered education savings plan, in my name as subscriber, with Oliver as beneficiary. I was the one who had opened it. I was the one who had been contributing to it. I asked her what my options were with respect to the monthly transfers. She said, "You can stop them whenever you want. It's your money." I already knew that. I suppose I needed to hear it said out loud. Then I did something I'd been meaning to do for months, but kept putting off. I looked at the records. I'm an engineer by training. I like documents and records. I had kept every bank transfer, every e-transfer confirmation, every text message about money between Russell and me. I had the original text conversation about the truck loan. Him asking, me agreeing, both of us agreeing it was a loan, not a gift, and that he'd start paying me back after 6 months. That conversation was dated 3 years ago. I sat with those records for most of the morning. Then I called my brother, who lives in Sudbury, and who has always been, in the plainest possible terms, a straight shooter. He listened to everything I told him, the dinner, the door, the missing invitation, all of it, without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long has this been going on, Phil?" That's my name, Phil. Short for Philip, though nobody's called me Philip since my mother died. I said, "Longer than I let myself see." He said, "You know what you have to do." I said I did. I didn't call Russell that day, or the next. I let Thanksgiving pass without contact, which turned out to be easy because he didn't reach out to me either. That told me something, too. The following Monday, I sat down and I did the accounting. Not emotionally, practically. I listed what I contributed since the wedding itself, the truck, the monthly transfers. I added it up. The number was significant. I'm not going to say exactly what it was, because that's not really the point, but it was well past six figures when you counted everything. Then I called my lawyer. I've had the same lawyer for 20 years, a man who has a small practice in Barrie and who speaks very slowly and thinks very carefully, and has never once told me what I wanted to hear. He's told me what was accurate. I've come to appreciate the difference. I asked him about the truck loan. He said that a handshake agreement documented by text message is an enforceable debt in Ontario. He said I could send a formal demand letter. I told him to prepare one. Then I went to my bank. I sat with a personal banking advisor and I made two changes. First, I canceled the automatic monthly transfer to Russell's joint account, effective immediately. The first of the next month would come and the money would simply not appear. No phone call, no warning. Second, I reviewed the respert for Oliver. It was structured so that I remained the subscriber. I updated my own contact information and confirmed that all correspondence would come to me. Oliver's education fund was Oliver's. I had no intention of touching it, but I wanted to make absolutely certain that it was protected and that it remained under my oversight, not Tessa's. I drove home and I walked Chester and I made dinner and I watched a hockey game. The Leafs lost, which was irritating but expected. Life felt unexpectedly quite manageable. On the 1st of November, my phone rang at 9:47 in the morning. It was Russell. I let it ring. Then I made myself a coffee and I called him back. He said, "The transfer didn't come through." I said, "That's right." There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough to be uncomfortable. He said, "Did something happen with the bank?" I said, "Nothing happened with the bank. I canceled." Another silence. "Then what do you mean you canceled it?" "I mean, I called my bank and I canceled the automatic transfer. I won't be making that payment anymore." His voice changed. Not to anger, exactly, to something more like disorientation, as if the ground had shifted under him and he was trying to figure out where to put his feet. "Dad, we're counting on that money, the mortgage." "I know you're counting on it," I said. "That's actually part of the problem." "What does that mean?" I said, "Russell, I stood on your doorstep on Thanksgiving with a bottle of wine and a pie and a card for your son, and you let your wife tell me I wasn't welcome. I drove back to Barrie alone and ate pie in my kitchen by myself, while you sat at a table I've been helping to pay for in a house I've been helping to fund, and you couldn't find it in yourself to come outside and talk to me." He didn't say anything. "I've been transferring $1,200 a month into your account for 18 months, I said. "I paid for your wedding. I gave you a loan for your truck that you have never made a single payment on. I have an education fund open for Oliver that I have been contributing to every year. I have done all of this because I love my son and I love my grandson. But I am not a tap, Russell. I am your father. And when you treat me like a tap, eventually someone is going to turn the handle." It was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tessa is going to." "I'm not having a conversation about Tessa," I said. "I'm having a conversation about you and me." He said he needed time to think. I told him that was fine. I told him that when he wanted to have a real conversation, not about money, about us, I was here. I always had been. I hung up. A week later, a letter arrived at Tessa and Russell's house from my lawyer. It outlined the truck loan in full, included the relevant text message correspondence, and formally requested repayment. It also noted, matter-of-factly, that any future disputes regarding the respite for Oliver would be directed through my legal representation, as I was the subscriber of record. I am told, through Oliver, who reports these things with the uncomplicated honesty of a 9-year-old, that Tessa was extremely upset, that there was a long argument, that Russell sat very quietly during it. Oliver told me this the following Saturday when he came to stay with me for the weekend. We raked leaves in the backyard together. He jumped in the pile before I could bag them up. He laughed so hard he fell over. I looked at him lying in that pile of leaves, laughing, and I thought, this is what matters. This kid. This moment. Not the money. Not the argument. Not the letter. This. But the letter was still necessary. You can love someone and still refuse to be taken for granted. A man can be soft in his heart and still have a spine. My father taught me that. I'm still trying to teach it to my son. Russell called me in mid-November. Not about the money this time. He called on a Sunday afternoon and he said, "Can I come over?" He came over. We sat at the kitchen table. He didn't make excuses, which surprised me. I had been prepared for excuses. Instead, he said, "I let things get out of balance." I know that. I asked him what he meant by that. He said, "I let Tessa handle too much of the family stuff, the invitations, the plans, and I knew she didn't. I knew things weren't right between you two. But I didn't want to deal with it, so I let her set the terms. And that wasn't fair to you." I watched my son's face while he said this. He was 36 years old, and he looked, in that moment, about 12. Not in a bad way, in the way that sons sometimes look like the boys they were, underneath everything that's been added since. I said, "I'm not looking for you to take sides between your wife and your father. I'm looking for you to show up, that's all. Just show up." He said he understood. We're not all the way back to where we were. I'd be lying if I said we were. Some things break and they heal, but the healed version is different from the original, and that's just the truth of it. I've stopped the monthly transfers. I don't plan to restart them. If Russell and Tessa need to adjust to a different level of lifestyle, that's an adjustment they're capable of making. They're adults. It's time they lived like it. The truck loan is a separate matter, and my lawyer is handling it. I expect it'll be settled eventually. I'm not in a hurry. The money isn't the point. Oliver's respart is untouched. I contribute every year. He's going to have options when the time comes, regardless of whatever else happens in this family. That one was never in question. I called my brother the week after Russell's visit and told him how it had gone. He said, "Good." I said, "It's not fixed." He said, "It doesn't have to be fixed, it just has to be honest." I thought about that for a long time. He's right, I think. Honesty is the foundation. The rest of it gets built slowly if both people are willing to build. Russell came for Christmas. Tessa did not. Oliver was there, which was what mattered. We made a turkey that was slightly overcooked on one side and perfect on the other. And Oliver said it was the best turkey he'd ever had, and I told him that was a very gracious lie, and he laughed. After dinner, while Oliver was playing in the backyard with Chester, Russell and I sat at the table with our tea, and we didn't talk about anything important. We talked about hockey and about a book I'd been reading, and about whether Chester was getting too old for long walks in the cold, which he is, but he pretends otherwise. It was ordinary. I missed ordinary. I hadn't realized how much until I had it back. I'm not telling this story because I want sympathy. I don't need sympathy. I'm 64 years old. I'm reasonably healthy. I have a pension, a dog, a good lawyer, and a grandson who thinks slightly overcooked turkey is the best turkey he's ever had. I'm telling this story because I think there are other fathers out there who have been mistaking generosity for a guarantee of love, who have been confusing what they give with who they are, who have been standing on doorsteps, holding wine and pie and cards with $20 bills inside, waiting to be let in. You don't have to keep standing there. You were allowed to walk back to your car. You were allowed to call your bank on Monday morning. You were allowed to say clearly and without apology that you are a person and not a resource. And then you rake the leaves and your grandson jumps in the pile before you can bag them up. And he laughs so hard he falls over, and you remember why you were fighting for your place in the first place. Not for the dinners, not for the recognition, for the ordinary moments, for the kid in the leaves. That's all it ever was. I keep thinking about that maple tree in my backyard. The way it drops its leaves every fall without any drama, no hesitation, no second guessing. It just lets go of what it no longer needs, and it's stronger for it come spring. I didn't cancel that monthly transfer out of anger. I want to be clear about that. By the time I sat down with my bank and made the change, the anger had already passed. What was left was something clear, a quiet kind of resolve that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself about what's actually happening. Here's what I've come to understand. Looking back on all of it, the way things unfolded between Russell and me wasn't random. There's a logic to these things, even when you can't see it while you're living through it. I gave without conditions for years, and without meaning to. I taught my son that the giving had no conditions. That's not Russell's fault entirely. That's something I participated in. When we don't hold ourselves to account honestly, when we choose comfort over clarity, we don't protect the people we love. We just delay the reckoning. And reckonings, in my experience, always come. What I had to find again, what I think every father eventually has to find, is the difference between being generous and being useful. Generosity comes from strength. It's a choice you make from a position of self-respect. Being useful, in the way I'd become useful to Russell and Tessa, is something else. It's a slow erosion. You don't notice it happening until you're standing on a doorstep on Thanksgiving, holding a pie you baked yourself, and you realize you've been quietly hollowed out. The intelligence part of it, and I mean that in the plainest sense, not in any academic way, was in stopping long enough to look at the actual facts. Not the story I'd been telling myself about family and loyalty and what good fathers do. The actual records, the actual dates, the actual silence from my son after I drove home alone that night. When I laid it all out in front of me, it wasn't complicated. It was just true. The hard part was the follow-through. Knowing something and acting on it are two completely different things. I've watched men my age talk themselves out of necessary action for years because they were afraid of the disruption, afraid of the guilt, afraid of being seen as the one who broke something. But I had to ask myself, what exactly was I protecting by staying quiet? Not my relationship with Russell, that had already been quietly broken for longer than I'd admitted, not Oliver. Oliver needed a grandfather with a spine, not a grandfather with a checkbook. What I was protecting was the illusion of peace, and illusions, no matter how comfortable, aren't the same as the real thing. Russell came back, not because I forced him to, but because I stopped making it easy to stay away. When I removed the financial cushion, I also removed the distance it had been funding. And what was left, underneath all the money and the resentment and the years of drift, was still a father and a son who remembered each other from before all of this. I raked leaves with Oliver last weekend. He jumped in the pile before I could bag them up. He always does. And I thought, this is what I was fighting for. Not to be thanked, not to be repaid, just to still be here, still in the yard, still in the picture. That's enough for me. That has always been enough.